Okay. So I think first thing first, like some of you might know a few things about me because, yeah, we are connected on LinkedIn in some form. And for those of you who don't know, like, I think first thing first, like whenever I go and talk to somebody, the first question I want to answer is, why should I listen to this person? And I think there are a couple of reasons why you should listen to me. First of all, like this is a topic of experimentation. I have a background in statistics because I did a minor in maths and computing at IIT Kharagpur. So when it comes to stats, I think I would say I am at least average when it comes to like understanding of stats. So that's the first thing. So I graduated from IIT Kharagpur in major in chemical engineering, minor in maths computing, and which is why like data and stats has been a recurring theme in my career, right? So at housing.com I built product analytics team. It was a big team by that standard. Like we had like a 14-15 member product analytics user research sort of team. So housing was I would say my first intersection with the product role, right? And then there is upgrad. The good thing is when I joined upgrad, I was the first PM. So I got to see a lot. Like it was pre-revenue. I got to see like upgrad growing from pre-revenue to $20 million in revenue. I set up the data team, data engineering team, data science team. Along with that, I set up the growth team. And then, of course, there is like the core product work, which is like building the community forum and few other products, right? So upgrad, I would say I was very lucky to be at upgrad at such an early stage. And hell of founders, like it is actually more, it says more about the founders to give an opportunity to a newbie in product domain to do so much, right? So I'm very grateful to the founders and the upgrad team in general. And then Flipkart is another addition. And the reason I skipped a couple of companies or like few companies is because I just want you to give you a sense of like what I know rather than walk you through my resume, right? So Flipkart was basically Flipkart is currently at like 40-50 billion dollars valuation. It's a large company, and again at Flipkart also we ran a lot of experiments. I worked on a couple of 0 to 1 products. I worked on a product that was already post PMF, right, and worked on growth of that. So that was Flipkart, and most recently I was with Unacademy. So you can see the edtech sort of in my profile upgrad, then Unacademy as a senior director of product, where I again like we did a lot of experiments around growth, learner experience, and all that, right? So all in all, like this context should help you ask more specific questions. This context should also help you build confidence on certain things I'm saying and sort of help you assess like where I'm coming from, right? So that's why the context. The second is the second reason I would say why you should listen to me is because of at least you should look why somebody is doing something, right? That's how I see it. The why is very important. Why is more important than what and how. And one of the recurring themes since last 3 years has been like I've been trying to help PMs. First, it started with Growth Catalyst newsletter where I wrote about growth for beginners. And then there is like, I realized that 70-80% of PMs are coming from non-tech background. They face a lot of difficulty when it comes to tech. I myself am from non-tech background, right? So wrote Tech Simplified. Most of you will know me from there. And then I think for last 7-8 months, I've been building PM Curve. The first program for PM Curve is Growth for PMs, but there are like more programs coming. And the goal of PM Curve is not to create another product interview sort of prep course. It is to actually like, can we create courses that can actually, or content that can actually help PMs create impact in their roles? Not like crack PM interviews. I think there is enough literature around that, and I don't need to sort of I would say recurate or curate like all that literature and put in front of PMs. So that's also the reason to do this session, which is like I'm sort of experimenting with this format where I say that, okay, can I take like 5 to 10 topics for PMs and try to at least get people to a basic level, right? Basic, what I mean by basic level is get PM to a level where they can start working, they can remove their insecurities and actually move forward and start being more bold in those areas, right? Experimentation is one of the areas that I feel many PMs need that sort of guidance, because there is no guide for experimentation. All we have is like A/B testing and some case studies and a few more terms floating around like p-value, significance, and all that. Right. So this is the first session. So I'm going to keep it slightly basic. There might be a second session on experimentation, which will be more advanced. Given that you folks have submitted the email, you'll get an email if there is a second session. But for now, let's focus on 5 key things. The first is, what's the need for experimentation? I feel like if I asked 5 different PMs, what is the need for experimentation? I will get 5 different answers. So the need for experimentation is universal, and at least like after this session, you should be able to very clearly articulate what is the need for experimentation in a particular organization. The second is, what are the necessary conditions for experimentation? At least in my career, I have seen a lot of companies doing this very, very well, and a lot of companies doing this very, very poorly, right? A lot of companies want to do it, but they can't do it because they don't understand this very well. A lot of companies are sort of doing this. They feel that they're doing a good job at it, but they're still sort of not there, right? So there are a few necessary conditions for experimentation that need to be there in order for an experimentation or A/B testing program to survive or succeed in an organization. That's the second topic. I feel the first two are very, very important, so that you can evaluate for yourself on what is lacking in your current organization when it comes to experimentation. Is it the mindset? Is it the culture? Or is it the willingness to not do few things, right? The third is sort of setting the context on, like, when we say experiments, like what do we mean? Is it a button color change? Is it a copy change? Is it like a website revamp? So we are going to look through like few case studies because we have limited time, but we are going to look through and say, and sort of look through these and establish that these are the shapes and sizes in which experiments come. The fourth one is important, which we can quickly go through and only focus on areas which are lesser known, right? Which is life cycle of an experiment. What does a life cycle of experiment looks like? And then finally, what are the common mistakes? And when I say common, don't presume that these are average mistakes that everybody knows about. In fact, like I've taken surveys in my courses, and I would say 70, 80, 90% of PMs actually don't know about the common mistakes that I'm going to cover. So with that, let's set few ground rules. So first of all, don't keep your mic open. If it is open, close it, or I will close it. I'll have to go back and sort of figure out whose mic is open and close it. Second, if you have any question in between, you can put it on the chat, right? So I will keep monitoring the chat. If I feel that that question is a blocker in understanding the topic I'm covering, I'll cover it now. If I feel that this can be taken for later because this is slightly off topic, or this is not something which I need to answer in order for you to understand the content of the deck, we can take it in the Q&A section, right? Which is at the last. Okay, now that context is set, first thing first, let me understand the audience that we have here, right? So I'm going to launch a poll. You should be able to see this poll in front of you. And the question is, which experimentation tool does your company have right now? Is it an in-house? In-house means you have built it yourself. Is it VWO, Optimizely? You don't have an experimentation program, or is it some other tool? If it is some other tool, just for my education, please put it in chat so that I can know like few more names and I can explore them. We have gotten 52 responses here, and I'll just wait for 5 more seconds and then I'll close this. This is a pretty interesting one. So 70% of people are saying there is no experimentation program. There is like few using VW Optimizely. most of the companies which are doing it are doing in-house, which is, I would say, pretty bold. We will discuss more. We'll take more questions in the Q&A section. But first, let's start with the need for experimentation. Right. So I feel this section has suddenly become more relevant because I can see like most of my audience is what, like not doing experiments. Right. So great. So I think the need for experimentation is very, very simple. When a company says they're data driven and they start sort of creating these data reports, analytics team comes with some data reports and all that. More often than not, what people are talking about is correlation rather than causation. And if you haven't found these two terms, like this is a pretty good meme to sort of say that, which is like if you look around your company and over time the number of shaved heads is proportional to sales, the data team might say that, okay, we should have more of our leaders shave their heads. And that is just correlation, right? So this might seem slightly exaggerated, but by the way, believe me when I say it's not, because a lot of times, so few companies do like high value action analysis where they talk about when people are doing this, they finally convert to our product. And so we should make more people do this, but it's merely a correlation. People doing a particular thing X does not lead to a particular thing Y. To establish causation, you have to do experimentation. You have to say that let's live in a world where this particular feature does not exist. Let's live in a world where this particular feature exists. And now let's compare if the payments are actually coming because of this feature and because people are using this feature. So most of the times the analysis, the trends, this people does, when people do this happens and that, all of that goes through a correlation sort of bias. Another set of correlation bias is people saying that because we launched this feature last month, here is a revenue increase and all that, right? Again, there is no evidence to support that. It could be that the market tailwinds are actually supporting your growth, like it happened a lot for companies in COVID, or like it could be something else. But unless you have sort of experimented with and without the particular feature, like you can't be sure that this is leading to some goodness, right? So the need for experimentation is so that you can know that a particular thing is actually adding value or not. And this is especially true when it comes to features, because a lot of companies create feature creep, which is like adding a lot of features without knowing which of them are actually essential to improving the customer experience or revenue, right? So that's the need for experimentation. And this is a very good, like if you still need slightly more, research heavy sort of thesis, this curve should help you. This graph should help you. This is from one of the research papers. You should just search for like quality of evidence pyramid, and this is what you'll get in Google. And what it says is basically your CEO's opinion, which is your head of product opinion, editorial's expert opinion. Those lie at the lowest rung of the pyramid of evidence, right? So that is not like if my manager or if the CPO is saying something is true, that is just an opinion. There is no way, that is not an evidence that, okay, because we launched this happened, right? Then there comes like case studies, case reports. This company, for example, Duolingo did this, so we should also do this because we are in education tech. Again, better than simple opinions, but still like not at the top, right? And then there are like surveys that you do with your users and all that. And you are saying that, okay, users are loving this particular feature. That is a better evidence than like saying that user love Duolingo, so they will love this leaderboard feature as well. Or your CPO just asserting that this is a better feature. We have launched amazing things, right? It's still better. The surveys are still better, but not there yet, right? And then there are like cohort studies, which is saying that, okay, last month we had the cohort behavior like this. This month we are actually like we have added 2 more things and this is the behavior and all that. That is better than like surveys and all that, right? You're looking at direct behavior, not just what people are saying, but what people are doing. That is what cohort studies do. And finally, there is like RCTs. And if you don't understand RCTs, don't mind this. This is basically the fancy term that is used in medical trials for A/B testing, right? So randomized controlled trials is what happens for drug approval and all that, right? But at the top, you have like A/B testing, and even above that, what is sitting is, can you look at 5 or 10 different tests and all of them are saying something coherent? That is the best evidence of any kind. A single A/B test, it's still prone to probabilities and errors. But if 5 different A/B tests are pointing into same direction, I'm not saying you conduct 5 different A/B tests with the same feature, but I'm saying in that line of thought, if there are 5 or 6 or 10 A/B tests that have been successful, that is the highest form of evidence that you can present, right? So take this and make a case for A/B testing your organizations, right? So far, so good. I'll be sharing the recording on PM Curve YouTube channel, so don't worry. Now that we have established why A/B testing is needed, let's move to what are the necessary conditions for A/B tests. So the first is you should have enough users or new users. If you don't have enough users or new users, I think you can't conclude a A/B test, right? So that's the prereq or necessary condition. How many? We will actually come to that when we calculate the sample size, right? Which is something that we cover later in the session. The second is your org should at least be aligned on the key metric that the org is chasing. It should not that different teams are chasing different metrics and all that, right? And then your team should be very, very aware of how your success metric ties to the North Star that company is chasing. Because a lot of times what will happen is you'll start chasing a particular metric that you and your manager sort of decided, or and your skip level manager decided. 6 months down the line, you're presenting very, very good A/B test results to the management or the founders or somebody. And they are asking, why are we chasing this goal, right? You don't want that to happen. And the simplest way to do that, to avoid that, is whatever success criteria you have, does it tie to the strategic priorities that the CEO has for the company? Does it tie to the North Star metric for the company? If you can tie that to the North Star of the company, tomorrow you will be able to answer why your team is chasing something, right? The best thing is if you can sort of tie that to the company and get a buy-in from the CEO or CXO or CPO. That is the best thing. But even if you can't get a buy-in, or you didn't get a buy-in, at least try to ask this question, whether success criteria for experimentation is actually tying to the North Star metric, right? The third thing is, like, can you make the changes and can you experiment? For example, in fintech, there are regulations that prohibit you from experimentation. So you have to be very, very, if you're a B2B enterprise product, like, and you have 10 clients, 15 clients, 20 clients, the experimentation might not go very, very well with them, right? So in B2B setup, what companies do a lot is basically they say that we are doing a limited launch. We are giving it to just some consumers, some sort of end users. And then these people will use it first. They will serve as our beta, and then we'll roll it out to all users, right? So that's sort of them doing a A/B test in a different fashion. But basically, your regulation should not prohibit you from making the changes, or your customer should not prohibit you from making the changes. And your founders or CEO or somebody should not prohibit you from making changes. For example, there is this famous case study from Amazon where sort of Jeff Bezos was not up for the Q&A that you see on Amazon product pages, right? So you see the reviews, and then there is a Q&A on top of that review. He was not very convinced on. In fact, he was against that Q&A thing that the team was proposing. And the team just said that we'll do the experiment. They did the experiment. It was very successful, and they launched the product, right? But suppose if Bezos had said that, okay, I don't like the idea, don't do it, then you can't do much, right? So your ceiling as a PM, because a lot of times you are working on some opinion or some conviction that you have built, your ceiling is always going to be your manager or their manager or their manager and so on, right? So make sure that the team is actually sort of willing to go through good ideas. Data driven is a very simple thing, which is a necessary condition. The second last one is willingness to invest in infrastructure, because uh, even if you are going after the tools, which is like VW or Optimizely, if you have an in-house tool, then of course you have to invest in infrastructure. But even if you don't have in-house tools, you have like VW or Optimizely, even then you have to invest a lot when it comes to setting up experiments, because sometimes it will slow down your pages, sometimes it will do something else, sometimes it will be a bit weirdly. So it might feel much easier to just launch the feature than sort of invest in infrastructure to do the A/B tests. But that is something that your org should have the willingness to in order to perform A/B tests. And finally, okay with failure. Now, this is my favorite one, because no matter which leader you talk to in Silicon Valley, they are very comfortable saying that Microsoft, for example, has a 90% failure rate with experiments. Google has 85-90% of failure rate with experiments. Even something which is upstart, which is like, I think Fareed Musawat was director of product at Slack. And I think this is Slack or Tinder, I don't remember which one. But his point is like, even in that stage, because it was in growth stage, 30% of experiments only succeeded. So that's a very, very high bar of failure, right? If 7 out of 10 things are failing when you launch them, that goes on to tell two things. First of all, in absence of an experimentation program, you are actually doomed, because you're launching 10 features and 7 of them actually don't add positivity. In fact, many of them add negative results for your customers, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is, you will have a much cleaner and much better experience if you actually ship things through experiments, because you'll be removing the 70% that is not useful, right? And in a lot of cases, that is 90%, 85%, 90%, and all that, right? So be very, very comfortable with failure. Now, this is not to say that you can't have a better success rate. In fact, in the initial stages of a product, you can have as high as, I have seen as high as like 70% success rate, which is like 7 or 8 out of 10 experiments are succeeding. And this is something that my team has done personally, like in the past. So this is not to say that you can't beat this metric, but if you're not comfortable with failure, then the team will always shy away from experimenting and they would try to launch the product directly, right? So that's one of the like cultural debt you carry if you're not comfortable with failure, because people will start seeing as like, if I go for experimentation, there is a chance this will fail, and then for this quarter I'll not have anything to show, right? So be very, very comfortable with failure as a org. So that's basically I have seen some questions. I'll take them towards the end. They're not blockers in understanding. The second thing is, experiments come in all shapes and sizes, right? So there is like Google's famous 41 shades of blue, which is like they actually experimented with 41 different shades of blue. Now, Google in 2009, when they conducted, they had like what? They had at least hundreds of millions of users coming every day to their search and actually typing something. So for them, it's possible to actually experiment with 41 shades of blue, because even 0.1% of that traffic can give you significant results. But this is not the case for everyone, right? So if you're Google, you can do this and you can generate a revenue net positive of like $200 million a year, right? But if you're not Google, don't try to start experimenting with colors and all that, because there are other examples which are bolder. For example, Bing, Microsoft Bing. I think this is one from one of their VPs who said that they experimented with longer headline of ads, which was very, very easy to do, because all you have to do is basically just extend the headline. And this in itself led to some 12% increase in CTRs and some 100 million net in jump in revenue. Now, the jump in revenue for Google is higher than jump in revenue for Bing, the reason is because Google has 95% of traffic, whereas Bing will have 3 to 4% of traffic, right? So the conversion for Google when it experiments with shades of blue might be much, much lower than what Bing needed to sort of get $100 million of revenue impact. So when you read the numbers, read them in context of the company and their baseline and all that, right? And then there comes Airbnb, and this is one of my favorite experiments of all time. They have written a very beautiful blog about it, the data science team, where they said that they tested URLs on which URLs perform better for SEO. Now, if you know slightly more about, like if you know a little bit about SEO, you know that companies like Booking, TripAdvisor, all these travel companies, including Airbnb, SEO is their lifeline, I would say, because people are not used to them like they're used to Instagram. So they have to appear on the top of Google search results to actually yield some organic traffic and some revenue for them without paying a lot for Google ads and all, right? So it's very important for them. And what they did is basically they created a control variant, which is like my current website. And then they created some URLs, because see, the problem is you can't have same URL having two different variants on Google. What happens is Google might start penalizing you when it comes to SEO. So the clever thing they did is they took like, let's say, some 45,000 URLs for different cities, and they launched the new product experience, new page experience on those, and the rest of them actually were on control. So in a true sense, it's not an A/B, but it's an A/B. It's one of the most fascinating way of doing an A/B. And the way they measure results is also very, very different, right? So they said that there is this control pages where we are seeing like the traffic getting generated, and that baseline is not changing much. And then there is this treatment control where the baseline would not have changed, and it would have been this dotted line. But now, because of new launches, the traffic has changed to this, right? So in a way, they are able to, without sort of doing an A/B, true A/B on a single page, they still were able to establish the difference between treatment and sort of control. And this kind of answers like one question that Tini asked, which is like A/B tests in pure form don't need to be like you creating two different versions also. Like you can be innovative and you can do something like this also. But the more precisely or more accurately you can sort of isolate the control and the test, the better you'll be able to sort of put the evidence that this particular thing has caused this particular effect, right? So be very, very clear and be very, very cautious about that. Because if you don't, then your experiment results are not valid. So the thing is, some of you might be thinking, if I were you, I would be thinking that, okay, Deepak, that's fine. Like you're telling me that experiments come in all shapes and sizes. For bigger companies, there could be smaller changes. For smaller companies, this could be bigger changes. What does it mean? What it means for you as a PM? If I had to tell you, is basically one of my favorite lines that comes from this book called On Writing by Stephen King. And he gives like a beautiful story about his uncle who was I would say, mechanic who used to fix windows and all. And he used to carry this big toolbox with him everywhere he went. And Stephen King used to accompany him. And at one point he asks, why do you need to, you just used a simple tool from the box while fixing this window. Why did you need to carry such a heavy box with you all the time? And his answer was, I don't know which tool I'll be using Uh, today or for this particular job. And that's also the PM role. So rather than thinking, okay, if I'm in this stage, should I learn about experimentation? If I'm this stage, should I learn about this kind of experimentation? I would say take a holistic approach. Just go in and understand everything that is out there, because tomorrow you might be working in a startup, tomorrow you might be working in a big company, so on and so forth. You don't want to sort of cap your learning by saying that, okay, I just need this tool for today, so let me just do this. Given that you're attending this session, just go out and learn everything that is there about experimentation or A/B tests, and create a like PM toolbox around experimentation rather than just a single tool that you are using today. right? So that's basically the first part, which is mindset, culture, uh, things to look out for when you're setting an experimentation program, and so on and so forth. Next, the second segment is the life cycle of an experiment. I'm just looking if there are any questions that are relevant, and then I can just announce but a shitty one. I think, okay. So when it comes to experiments, the first thing you have to do is you have to start by setting the goal for your experimentation program, not just experiment. So this is an approach that a lot of teams take. They will come with ideas first, and then they'll be like, now we have these 10 ideas, which will change 10 different things. So let's perform these experiments and see whether those 10 different things change. There's a big problem with this approach. The first is basically you are not picking a big overall success metric for your team, which ties to the North Star of the company. So tomorrow, anybody can come and question why you are doing these experiments. That's the first thing. The second thing is you're not going to have accumulated learnings, right? So to get, like, if you know that you are chasing conversion from a particular page, whatever experiments you do for that, you can keep learning whether this works or this does not work. You can have like learnings accumulated over time. Your ideas will become better over time. You'll understand the users better on why they're converting or not converting. But if you have 10 different ideas, one about like people clicking on this button, one about the conversion, one about people clicking on this payment option and all that, that's not going to sort of give you accumulated learning. The second thing is by setting a goal, big goal, or a success goal for the team, you will avoid any sort of goal shift in between, because it's very, very easy for you to share that goal to big forums as well as small forums. And people will usually buy in quickly, or they will say they have an objection about the goal. But nonetheless, the end result will be basically you'll have a goal that everybody can be aligned with because you have a simple single goal, right? That also ties to the North Star of the company. The third is having focus. Now, this is something which I've learned this year, which is like focus is very, very important to create anything meaningful. And usually, like I have always been the person who wants to do more and more. Right? In college, I used to play sports like cricket. I was in my college cricket team. I was in literary society. I was doing maths and computing minor with chemical major. And like there are like I was doing my own startup in clean energy and all that, right? So a lot of things. I have always been a proponent of doing a lot of things, and which is why what you'll see in my role also. Like I'm a generalist in life, but what you realize as a PM is if you can actually focus on singular goal and like take every feature or everything in that direction, it's way faster and way easier to achieve that difficult goal than if you try to do 10 different things, right? So nowadays, if you ask me, like every week, my goal is to cut down on number of things that come to my mind and number of things I'm doing so that I can just focus on one or two things that I can do with focus. And that is to make sure that I can achieve something in 3 months, which will take me 6 months otherwise, right? So that's the third thing. The focus for the team is very, very important, and that's why you need to define the goal. The fourth is if you define a goal and everybody buys into it, it's very, very easy to prioritize some of the features you're building or get the cross-functional support, right? You can even anticipate when you need that support, so it will be easily available when the time comes. And the fifth one is, which is a subset of basically goal shifting, is you can easily get a buy-in from leadership, right? If you know the goal you're achieving. So I would say that's, and by the way, like most of what I'm telling you, I have actually made a mistake in my life and learned the hard way. So I would say this is possibly the most important thing if you are planning to lead the experimentation program for your team or your company, or if you're setting the experimentation for your team or company. Right now, when it comes to goal, there is one big thing that people miss, and we are going to cover what that is through this question. So you are the lead PM at an e-commerce platform search team. What would be a good goal for that particular team? Will it be a CTR on search results, or will it be user conversion? I'll wait for 5 more seconds. And one more. Yes. Okay. So the reason I put this question is because if you're a PM who believes their life's mission is like customer first, they possibly go towards like CTR on search results, because CTR is a measure of whether a person who is searching is able to find what they're looking for. If you have worked with business in your life, I have worked with business in my life because I started as a business analyst and then sort of led growth teams. And as a growth team, you have to work with business. You will lean towards user conversion, but I have a simpler framework that should help you, right? The simpler framework is the goal should be at the intersection of the user need and business needs. So CTR, though it's a user first metric, there are a few problems with the CTR. The first of all is it's actually gameable. If CTR is moving in a positive direction, you can't be sure that it's actually a good thing or a bad thing. Most 80-90% of times it's a good thing, but there is a 10-20% possibility that it is a bad thing, right? So CTR is a very, very hard metric to define in a non-gameable way, right? So that's one, which is why, like, if you work with search teams, you'll see that CTR keeps fluctuating, and like they have been working on the CTR for years, but it still keeps fluctuating on the same levels that it was like 3 years back. Most of the time, they're catching up with the new catalog, some market trend changes, and all that, right? So user conversion, on the other hand, is the true proxy for whether user found something they're looking for or not. So user conversion is a much better metric than CTR because you can be very, very sure that people are finding what they were searching for, right? And it also ties into your business needs, which is like if you have higher conversion, you as a team are contributing more to business. There can be no two questions about that, right? So try to pick the goal of whatever we have said, add to that, try to pick the goal which sits at the intersection of business needs and user needs, because a lot of times you would want to reduce it. For example, even if you know that your company is chasing GMV or revenue, you'll come back to your team and your team is going to tell you that, okay, GMV and revenue is fine. We can't chase that. We're the search team. Let's do one thing, like our conversion. One PM says that our conversion will tie to GMV. Let's improve our conversion. The other PM is like, okay, but conversion is dependent on other teams also. Let's pick something that we can affect, which is the CTR. And it sounds logical, but the problem is you increase your CTR by 2%. You go to your business team or your CEO and you tell them we have increased this. Their question will be, but yeah, like what happened with the GMV, right? But if you go to them saying that we have increased the user conversion, they would actually, first of all, they will appreciate. And then they will ask again the same question, which is like, what is the impact on GMV, right? So very like subtle point, but the level at which you should stop for your team is the level at which it can represent both the business needs and user needs. And there's no, I would say, confusion around that, right? So first is like set the goal for experimentation. The second is determine if it's a server side or client side experiment. I think you'll get this slide and you can go through it. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but very, very quickly, it's very, very important to, for example, a recommendation experiment has to be triggered from server side, which is basically your recommendation you are changing, your algorithm is changing. So it can't happen on client. But suppose you're changing the color of a button, it will happen on the client side, which is on the mobile device or the user device, right? So for those of you who are not aware of this, don't worry, like you can just go and quickly read it. But the point I wanted to cover is have a basic understanding of client and server side experimentation and understand like how simple experiments work, right? So I'll just cover in like a couple of minutes. So when a user arrives on your website or an app, what happens is their user ID gets generated, right? And that user ID needs to be assigned to either saying that, okay, this person will see the website as is, or this person will see the website plus the feature we have launched. So one becomes the control and one becomes the test. Now, once you have assigned this particular user to a particular bucket, you have to make sure that you don't change it. If it changes, it will just contaminate the experiment. Because now a person who has seen the feature is suddenly not seeing the feature, or a person who has not seen the feature is suddenly seeing the feature. So the bucket should not intermingle. And that's basically the basis of setting up the experiment. When you set the experiment, you make sure that there is a clear separation between the test group and the control group. The group that is not seeing the feature and the group that is feature being tested on, right? So that separation is very, very important. And the best way I advise PMs to actually understand is not just ask engineers if it is separated. The better way is for you to go and understand the underlying logic on when and where the users are getting assigned to a test or control group. You have to be very, very clear about when and where they are getting assigned, because depending on where they are assigned, if they're getting assigned the moment they arrive on the website versus like 5 seconds later versus 10 seconds later versus 1 minute later, can actually affect the contamination level of experiments, right? So that's basically the second thing I would say you have to care about. Determine if it is a server side or client side experiment and understand how users are getting assigned to the experiment. The third is an interesting one, which is determining the sample size. And the first thing that, when we say sample size, the first thing that comes to people's mind who understand experimentation is p-value, right? So sample size is basically saying that, okay, if I show this test to this many of users, I can be confident whether this feature will improve the metric or not. So in the way, most simple terms, it is that, right? So if I calculate my sample size to be 10,000, if my test has been through 10,000 users, I can then calculate the results and say whether it is moving the metric or not moving the metric. If the result is moving, if I can see that the metric has moved, I can be confident it has moved. If I see that metric has not moved, I can be confident that it's not moved. But unless I reach that sample size, that significance level, I can't say whether my metric is improving or not improving. I can't say before that, right? So that is basically the value of sample size. Now, sample size calculation depends on few things. The first thing is p-value, right? So p-value is very, very simple. Like your p-value has to be less than 0.05. It's this simple thing you have to remember, which means that there's a 95% chance that the result you are seeing is actually true and not a matter of chance or luck, right? I'll just pause here and see if there are any questions on this. Do you understand the role of chance or luck in experiments? Because it's very, very important. So chance and luck actually ties to the sample size, and I'll explain in a moment, right? So suppose you went ahead and talked to 5 of your users and asked them if they loved this feature, and all 5 of them said that they loved the feature. You can come back to your team and say that I talked to 5 people and 100% of them actually love the feature. So let's roll out, because 100% of users are going to love our product. Now, the problem is you have done everything right, but the problem is there is a big chance that the 5 people that you talked to were actually favorable for your feature. So the more number of people you talk to, the more you reduce the factor of chance or luck. And that is what p-value measures, right? So the lesser the p-value, the lesser is the chance or luck in your results. right? That's the practical way of understanding p-value. You can go and read the statistical representation of p-value, and it's always a bouncer if you ask me, right? So let me take Rahul's question on this. Most of the time, p-value is greater than confidence interval, but check metric and success metric are moving positive. Rahul, I didn't understand the question. Can you?
So basically, sometimes like p values, like most of the cases, it is greater than 0.05. It means it is not statistically significant. But are all the North Star metric or check metric related to experiment are moving in correct direction or directionally looks correct? So what should we do at that point of time? Like how we convince or how we should figure out that is experiment really working? Because always you don't have time to have exact sample size so that you can reach significant value. So what should you do in that pace?
No, so if you don't, let me tell you the risk of it, not reaching the significance value. So if your p-value is 0.05, it means that 5 out of 100 times, there is a chance that your result is not true. If your p-value is 90, that means 10 out of 100 times, which is 1 out of 10 times, there is a chance that what you are seeing is not true. And the lesser the p-value, the higher the probability that what you are seeing is not true. So that's the risk. If you are comfortable as an organization that we are fine with a risk that 2 out of 10 times will make the wrong decision, go with a 80%
Got it. That
p-value,
explains.
right?
Yeah.
80% confidence level. So that's how you should read it, right? Usually,
Got
like industry accepted norm is to at least have a 90% confidence interval or a p-value of less than 0.1, right? So that's what you should aim. But if you can't reach that, be very, very aware that you might be reading the results which are not correct 2 out of 10 times or 3 out of 10 times.
Got it. Thanks.
The second is, Dipanshu, I'll take your question later on because, again, it's not a blocker. The second is, so p-value is the first factor. The second factor is MDE. So MDE is basically the minimum detectable effect, which is like the smallest improvement you want to detect. So suppose you have a 10% conversion from checkout page to payment, and you want to run an experiment. Now, the second thing you should be asking, apart from p-value, is what is my MDE? Because MD is basically saying that, okay, I want to detect any change which is more than 10.1 or less than 9.9. So my MD is 0.1%. But if some change is leading to like a change less than 10.1 or greater than 9.9, which is like if it is lesser than MD, I don't want to detect that, right? So your MD needs to be defined for experiments, because an improvement lesser than MD, you won't be able to detect on the sample size you calculate using the MD, right? Now let me elaborate this with some example, right? Suppose you want to test a new drug for dogs, right? And the drug promises that dogs' height will increase, right? Now there are two cases, like two different experiments happened, and in one case, they're saying that the increase in height, like I want to detect even if the increase in height is 1 centimeter, right? In other case, they're saying that I want to detect only if my increase in height is more than 10 centimeter, right? So in one case, you want to detect increase in height more than 1 centimeter, which is my minimum detectable. In second case, your MD is 10 centimeter. Now just take a simple guess and tell me, like, where would you need a higher sample size? I'm asking you to take a guess, right? So don't think much. Go with whatever your intuition says. Where will you need higher sample size? Great. We are split, which is a good thing, which means that some of you can benefit from what I'm going to say next. Okay, I will close this. Now, the thing is, what you'll see is, I think there is 60% 1 centimeter and 40% 10 centimeter, right? The thing is, go back to the basics of experimentation or sample size. We said that we want sample size. Why? Because we want to eliminate the role of luck or chance. Now, if a dog has grown by 10 centimeters, what is the role of chance and luck in that versus when a dog has grown by 1 centimeter? The role of chance or luck will be higher if the detection in height, like the increase in height is just 1 centimeter, isn't it? Because it could be a random thing that the dog has grown by 1 centimeter. But if the dog has grown by 10 centimeter, the thing that it will be a matter of chance or luck is low. Sorry, I got disconnected. Yeah, so the point I was making is, if you basically the matter of chance is much higher if the dog has grown by 1 centimeter than if the dog has grown by 10 centimeter or the dog has grown by 100 centimeter. In that case, you can be very sure that this drug actually was effective. So you don't need a lot more higher sample size if you can say that there is lesser probability that this is a chance or luck, which is why when you want to detect lower MDE, you need a higher sample size. And that's why we can't set MDE as low as possible. Because the common sense says that, okay, if we are going to detect the change, detect as low as possible. Now, we want to know if there is a change in positive or negative direction as low as possible. Because that way I can be sure that whatever experiment I'm launching, I'm able to detect changes very efficiently. But the problem with that is, if you set your MDE very low, you need a higher sample size to rule out the chance or luck. Which means that if you have 100,000 users and your MDE is very low, you would need longer time to conclude an experiment. So that's why you need to play around with MDE and p-value both to arrive to a sample size, which is good for your company, right? And the third thing that sample size will depend on is power, right? Now the power, now the power is very simple. Power is basically saying that when a change happens, I would be able to see it. My system will be able to flag that change, right? So again, we are talking about all the probabilities and all. One of the things that is difficult around probabilities is basically you saying that, okay, this is something I've taken for granted. Why is this not happening? So when I talk about power, your first question is, I want to detect all the changes, not just like 8 out of 10 changes or 6 out of 10 changes and all that. And the answer to this is, again, higher power will cost you more sample size. Are you willing to do that? Right? So these are the 3 things on which you can play around and try to calculate the sample size. Right? Now, this is a question for you, and you can use the link that I'm sharing here. I'll just open this for you. This is what it should look like. And the question is, if you have a p-value of this 0.01, baseline conversion of 10%, MDE of 10% relative, not absolute, and power of 95%, what will be your sample size? Wait, can you see the question? Okay. So go here. This is a pretty good calculator, by the way, Ivan Miller. He also writes a lot about A/B tests. So he's one of my favorite writers. So your P is 0.01. By the way, your P 0.01 is significance level, which is at 5%. It should be at 1%. Your power is 95%, which is like 95 out of 100 times you want to detect the change. Your baseline conversion is 10%. and your MD is 10%, but not absolute, relative. And now you can see 10% relative means anything between 9 to 11%, I don't want to detect. I want to detect when the number moves below 9% or above 11%. And this is the answer you get. Right? So use this calculator and then you will know, like, this will answer some of your questions. If I have lower traffic, what I can do is I can say that, okay, I want to do experiments which will bring higher changes, which means that I want to increase my MDE. And by increasing my MDE, I am reducing my sample size from 32,000 to 8,000. Right? Or by reducing my power, I am reducing my sample size. By reducing my significance level, I'm reducing my sample size further. So rather than having a 32,000 sort of sample size, I just need 3,000 because I've changed my MDE, power, and significance level. Right? That's the beauty of understanding how A/B tests work. Chandrakant, if is that clear to you? Like the MD, the MD that you set usually guideline is 1 to 10% relative to the baseline. Right? Now, depending on the traffic and everything you have, you can set that MD for yourself somewhere between 1 to 10%. Feel free to add another question if you have. And then the last thing is mistakes in life cycle of an experiment. And there, again, avoid these mistakes because, again, I've seen that happening. So I'm just calling that out. The first thing is not calculating sample size in advance. So you see how, like, we set the parameters and said that we need 32,000 or 3,000 or 8,000 sample size. A lot of teams, they start the experiment and then they will calculate the sample size and number of days it should be running, right? Don't make that mistake. And there is a reason for that. That will come in one of the other mistakes. The second mistake is not evaluating non-binomial metrics differently. So there is this binomial and non-binomial metric. Does anyone know what binomial and non-binomial metrics are? Okay, I'll take that as no. So binomial metric is basically your conversion. For example, binomial metric can only take the form of 1 or 0 in your population. So when I say user level conversion, a user can either transact or not transact. There is no third state, right? So user is either converted or not converted. Similarly, a session is either converted or not converted. But what about like time spent? When I actually go for time spent is not 0 or 1. Time spent can be 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. So if I make an experiment live that increases the time spent or that increases the revenue, because revenue is also not 0, 1. Whether somebody gave you revenue or not is a 0, 1. But how much revenue they give is not binary. And which is why it's not a binomial metric, not a binary metric. For non-binomial, you can't use the calculator of Evan Miller. You have to use different calculator. This is one link I put. I'm not going to log in and all. But the point being that don't use like non-binomial metrics using the same calculator that you are using for binomial metric. If you are instrumenting an experiment to change revenue, then try to sort of make sure that you are using a different calculator than you are using for conversion, right? That's the second mistake. And believe me when I say, like, this is a very, very common mistake across companies that I've seen. The third is peaking, right? Which is like an APM in my team actually made an experiment live. And after 2 days, the APM comes and says that, Deepak, we have a 10% lift. We should be very, very happy. Right? And I'm like, yeah, but the experiment was not supposed to conclude before 14 days. He's like, no, don't worry. We have done the p-value calculation and our p-value is actually less than 0.05 and we have gotten a significant result. The problem with that is called peaking. If you peak, if you start calculating your experiment result before it reaches the sample size that you put in, there's a good chance that you will find some false positives, which is like you'll find some positive result with p-value less than 0.05, where the result is not actually positive. And this is basically like uh, from a real study, like they pulled out this graph where they say like you look at the non-significant experiments, which are like the brown ones, right? And what you'll find is between 5 and 10 days and between 10 and 15 days, there are some brown ones which have p-value less than 0.05, this dotted line, which means that if I've seen this experiment, this brown one, on day 6, my APM would have come and said that our p-value is less than 0.05, let's shut the experiment and launch the feature. Whereas if we had waited for 20 days for the sample size to hit, it would have been proven a non-significant experiment. Again, very counterintuitive. And that's what stats is, by the way. Very counterintuitive, but very, very true. So that's basically that. This is the most common mistake. I told you, right? Like this is non-binomial, binomial. I've seen people still know a little bit about, but this is like, yeah, you have launched something, you want to peak. And when you peak, you calculate p-value, and then you're like, yeah, we are good to go, good to launch. But non-significant tests can actually give you significant results if you are peaking. So don't do that. And the last thing is multiplicity. In fact, I saw this post from, I don't remember the name, or even if I remember it, I won't name it. I saw this post from a very senior leader, product leader, who was advising to sort of take the experiment, segment it, and then sort of analyze different segments, how they behave and all that. As a problem stats sort of hobbyist, this is referred as multiplicity, which is basically if you segment your experiment and evaluate results for each of them, you will see some false positives, which is like you'll see positive results where it's not. So segmentation is prohibited unless since the beginning you said that I have taken all these 5 segments, I have calculated their sample size requirements, and only after all of these individual segments meet their sample size requirements am I going to close the experiment and then do the analysis. So unless you're performing since the beginning, you're performing that job of calculating sample size and MD and everything, you should not segment the results of an experiment. So that is one way of multiplicity. But then there is like another. Sorry, folks, I don't know why my internet is dropping a little bit. So the second, which is more common, by the way, is you did an experiment, you launched a feature, you might as well look at all the metrics that this feature touches. And that again creates a lot of false positives, because if you look at 10 different metrics for a particular feature, there's a good chance that 1 or 2 metric will turn up to be positive. Again, strongly not advisable. You should have maybe 1 metric, 1 counter metric, and maybe 1 more metric, like take 2 or 3 metrics, but not more than that, right? So analysis of multiple outcomes, analysis of multiple subgroups, right? Analysis of same outcome different times, which is peaking, right? You're taking the same outcome, you're analyzing at different times without it reaching the sample size. All of this is leading to multiplicity, which is strongly prohibited in clinical trials and in sort of real life experimentation as well. So that's basically the mistake. And I would say like this is, I think this should get you basics covered very, very well when it comes to experimentation. In fact, like some of this, I didn't know even if I've been doing like experimentation for last 5-6 years, right? And I know for a fact that a lot of my friends don't know this. So I think if you have attended this session, if you go and read about whatever we have covered, I think you'll be good. So that's all. The last thing is, I think this is one of my favorite quotes from Any Given Sunday, and possibly because it's delivered by Al Pacino, which is like games are like you fight for the inch and you claw your fingernails for that inch, and then at the end of the game you'll realize that all those inches sort of add up and matter. And such is a case for experimentation programs. Like you do small changes, you do bigger changes, you do medium changes. And at the end of the year, what you're looking to is a lot of wins that accumulated together to give you a big boost, right? And that's the difference between a brilliant product or a product that is amazingly solving the problem for a user versus a product that is just built on opinions and surveys and all that, right? So this should give you a boost to actually, like, because a lot of people don't have experimentation program in their companies. By the way, if you don't have one, if you have any personal question, feel free to ping me on LinkedIn and I would be happy to answer you. But for now, let's move to the Q&A, and I hope that you'll actually add experimentation program in your companies. So let me go to the Q&A thing. Thank you, Shobik. What additional variables come into play for non-binomial? So Tenny, don't think about additional variables. See, it's just differently set, right? So when I'm trying to calculate the role of chance in a binomial metric, it's a very different sort of calculation as compared to a continuous metric. So the stats in both cases works differently, and that's why, like, you need to do different tests, and that should be enough. Like, beyond that, you don't need to know actually how it works unless you're doing some research over it, writing a paper over it, or you are building your in-house tool around it, right? In which case, the data scientist or engineer should be willing to go deeper and separate binomial and non-binomial tests and build for that, right? But yeah, you as a PM don't need to do that. You just need to avoid that mistake. Thank you, Avish. Questions? I'm hoping like some questions will come. Dipanshu had this question: what should be the percentage of sample size in respect to total base? You don't need to care about the percentage of sample size. You need to care about the absolute amount of sample size and then see if your total base is willing to meet that. If not, then you adjust the variables we talked and then sort of go back with that sort of sample size, which works for you. Akhila has this question: could you suggest a workaround to A/B testing for a B2B product with no sufficient sample size? So Akhila, you can open the mic if you want, and we can do a more like back and forth discussion, because I see some. Yeah.
Sure. Deepak.
Tell me. So
In some B2B products, like I've noticed that, let's say when we calculate the adequate sample size, it's much higher. Whereas like we really, I mean, probably like, let's say the usage number is running to thousands and the adequate sample size probably like in maybe some 10,000s. So in that case, like most of the times we have given up the idea of experimenting. I mean, we probably go by a lot of anecdotes also sometimes. So I mean, is there a better way to do things there? Like, because maybe A/B testing may not be the way to go. Like, or what do you think?
no, I get what you're saying. So see, suppose it's true that if I'm looking for a sample size, it will be in the order of 1,000 at least, not like hundreds. And if you have hundreds of customers, again, the problem is you can't test on all of them. At best, you can do 50-50 or 60-40 and all that. So with that constraint, I think the good thing about B2B is you can do a couple of things very, very well. One is your MDE can be very, very high, because what can happen in B2B is what you're looking for is, you know, that the adoption, for example, for a particular feature, if you're changing that feature, can go by like absolute 10 percentage points or 20 percentage points. And that is not the case for B2C. So first is like, try to tweak these MDE and like MDE and other sort of variables that we talked about, and try to see if you can still meet the sample size. That's the first thing. In some cases, that will still not give you the right, you don't have that number of customers. In that case, you have to rely on, see, you are already doing it in some form. The first is like in B2B, you talk to a lot of customers. So you have a lot more validation on what needs to be built, right? Because they're talking about their pain points and all that. So I still fail to see a case where you're not confident that this change will bring the goodness, and you're still doing it. The reason I'm saying is, just bear with me. The reason I'm saying is, if I have 50 customers, I can be reasonably sure in a post-launch survey or by talking to them individually and covering all 50 of them that this feature is a success or not. The only place where the need for experimentation will arise is if I have 500 or 1000 or 5000 customers, because I can't talk to those many of them. So the need for experimentation also arises because the magnitude of your customer base is higher, right? And which is also the prereq for doing experimentation. So it works beautifully, right? So if you are not there yet, if you are still like in the initial phases, having 10 customer, 20 customer, 30 customer, I would suggest don't go for A/B testing. Go for maybe a limited rollout, which is like you, if you're not sure whether this will add value, roll it out to just 5 customers. Don't roll out to 20 customers, 30 customers. So minimize the risk of launch, but more often than not, after the launch, just talk to 20, 30, 40, right? That should do you well. Does that answer your question?
Got it, got it. But I was talking about a slightly precarious situation where, let's say the product is growing, we have about eight, I mean, let's say 800, 900, let's say even 1000 customers. So you're in a place where you cannot talk to 1000 customers. At the same time, you're still building products based on talking to, let's say, your 20 power users. I mean,
Yeah,
your,
yeah.
I mean, anchors. You constantly in touch with them, and you're pretty much building products for them. And I've seen that then at some point we are probably not able to scale it to beyond, let's say, 1000. So
No, so
we
I'll
then
give,
missing
I
something.
think I get what you're saying. I'll give you like one example, right? So in that particular case, try to tweak the metric also. For example, if my metric is, I have set my metric at something which is more rarer, right? Which is suppose not adoption of the feature, but feature getting used every day, then my baseline will be very, very low. Like my baseline could be 10% of users use it every day. But if I can change my baseline by taking a success metric, which is more a function of, let's say, adoption, simple adoption, then I can say that my baseline is at 40% because 40% of people adopt versus at 10%. At 10%, I need 2,800 people. At a metric which where baseline is 40%, I need just 400 people. Right? So you can choose proxy metric, leading metric rather than lagging metrics, right? Which you know that okay, adoption is higher, then yeah, more people will use it and will design a different thing. So first is focus on changing the metric and then focus on your MDE, right? Because in that case, I can say that okay, 10% MDE, but power I need, and this is what I'm comfortable with. Now, let me see if I need to tweak this to 20%, 32 to 48. I think the feature we are launching, at least adoption should move from 400 customer to 500 customer, which is what? More than 20% jump. I just need 400 customers in the sample size. So you can do that, right?
Got it, got it. I think you explained it very well. Thank you so much.
Sure. What else, folks? Tini has this question. How long we can confidently say that the experiment results doesn't change over time? The all experiment variables to conclude experiment we discussed are considered. So Tini, as soon as you have hit the sample size, you can say that the experiment results won't change beyond that. You can just take the result. So suppose you calculated your sample size is 5,000. As soon as 5,000 test users have experienced the product, you can look at the results and say that this is the result we are going to hold for a longer period of time. You can conclude the experiment. Okay. Anybody who doesn't have experiment set up in their organization, they have any question on how to set it up, or like, does it even matter? Does it even matter for their organization and all that? You can put it in chat if you don't want to speak and sort of be more anonymous, and I can take the question without taking the name. Or you can DM me. That's actually much better. That's a very good point, Tini. So, Tini, like the nature of traffic and product can change after the experiment has concluded, which is why a lot of companies, and this I was planning to cover in second part, but now that the question is here, I can cover it. So there is a holdout group that companies build, like at least bigger companies like Facebook and Instagram, they employ this, which is like for the entire year, I'll have like 1%, 2% of users who don't see changes. And that is my holdout group. That is my true control group. So over time, I can see the net positive impact of all the successful experiments I've done, right? Or over time, I can also compare what a particular experiment had, like a particular experiment that was concluded 5 months back, does it hold the same goodness 5 months later, right? So to eliminate any kind of time-based bias, companies create this holdout or back testing, where they hold a group as control for a longer period of time, and they compare that with like wherever they are like rolling out the features. But yeah, I don't need to, by the way. See, it's a matter of probability, right? So tomorrow, if the market changes, even your core product need will change. So if you're not doing holdout, I think you're still good with doing experiments and assuming that they will bring goodness for a long period of time. Because if the market or landscape changes and that makes the feature obsolete, you can say the same thing about your overall product also. So you can't do anything about that. All you can do is today you can launch a feature that customers love. You can launch a feature that the next one, what is the point of experimentation in B2B products when client itself is asking the requirement? Yeah, Anudeep, again, if you have, it depends on the stage, right? So when we say B2B, B2B has three categories. One is basically the enterprise products, where you have 50 to 100 customers, and that's the extent of it. So in that case, if the client is asking the requirement, there is no need for experimentation. Then there are small and medium businesses product, like SMB. In SMB SaaS, like HubSpot, and they have like thousands and tens of thousands of customers. So in that case, you need to do experiment to make sure that majority of your customers actually like it. And you might have some enterprise, like Zoom has some enterprise customers, and then there are most of the clients are actually B2C or B2B. But Zoom would still need to experiment whatever feature it rolls out, even if it's coming from an enterprise customer. So SMB SaaS and SMB and basically very small businesses, things like Shopify and all, right? They would still need to do experiment. Whenever the size of your customers, number of your customers increases beyond a point, you need to do experimentation to make sure that majority of your customers actually like it. And there is a net positive for everyone. Yes, Chandrakant.
Yeah, Deepak. So my question is same. I have asked how we can arrive at the MD. So I just wanted to clear my understanding. Uh, like in the example which is given here, uh, like if we want to detect a 5% increase in website signups, but how we can arrive at this number, whether this number would be 5%, 6%, 1%, 2%, because that will help me to detect the sample size. But how can I arrive at this number?
Yeah, so there are multiple ways of arriving at it. The first is basically you look at the total number of users you have. So suppose I have 100,000 users and the cadence of experiment that you want to conduct. So suppose I want to do 10 experiments with 100,000 users that are coming in, right? Now that gives me 10,000 users per experiment, right? And this is, I'm saying hypothetical so that you get the point. I'm not trying to be accurate or precise. Now with 10,000 users, what is the MDA that is doable for my product? I know my baseline conversion is 5%. I know my, I would like to keep at least 90% confidence interval. I would want to keep at least 80% power. With those variables and 10,000 sample size, what is the MD that I should follow? So sometimes it's actually like working backwards from saying that my cadence is these many experiments, my number of customers is this, so my MD can't be lower than this. Because in an ideal world, I would have like to have the best MD or the lowest MD, right? So that's basically
Yes.
calculating from the back. The second way is, of course, having an upper bound. For example, if your conversion is 10%, you don't want to have a MD of 10% relative, because that means that an experiment which is giving you a 99.5% conversion, you are okay with not detecting that. And that is not a good thing, right? So then the second filter is your comfort level, or how much business loss can happen if you choose a higher MD, because you want to increase
Correct.
cadence for your experimentation. So that will define the upper bound, and this, your cadence of experimentation and ambition, will define the lower bound, and then you can take a call.
Okay. Thank you.
Funny, where can we learn more about experimentation in detail? Let me share like the slide I will share. Funny, I'll add one more slide to add sources so that everybody gets it. Kishore has this question: can we practice experimentation by working on some use cases? Please suggest. Kishore, can you come up and clarify this question? Just like 2 cents, like you can't practice experimentation by working on some use cases. See, you understand the maths and all. I think you should be pretty fine with, you should be pretty good with when you actually get to do or get asked to do some experimentation, right? So don't worry about like whether I'll be able to do experiment or not. If you want to do it for building your portfolio, because you want to crack like some interview where you want to show that, I would suggest you create a simple blog for yourself, like use one of the like blog website making, one of those website makers. You create a website and then sort of implement VW or Optimizely, which have a free tier, sort of implement that and try to sort of change some copy and image and all that, and try to drive some traffic through LinkedIn on that and see whether they convert or not. Just try a simple me page or a newsletter page or like some guide page. You create a simple guide and try to sort of do some experiments there. So that is what I would suggest if you want to sort of hands-on experience it. But if you understand the basics that I've covered and you go and read more about it, I think anytime you get to lead experimentation program, you should be pretty comfortable with it. I hope that answered your question, Kishore. Shavik has asked some sources of studying statistics for PM. Shavik, like these experimentation resources I'm going to suggest, they should be good enough for covering the basic stats that you need to learn. Stats book usually are very boring if you ask me. So I would not recommend a pure play stats book. The only stats book that I recommend people is How to Lie with Statistics, because it teaches you like how people can fudge numbers and how they can misrepresent bad data. And by reading that, you can definitely become a much better product manager, a manager of manager, or a product leader, because then you can spot the lie in the statistics very, very easily. Right. Abhishek has this question: how do we implement this for a CRM program for e-commerce player? Major channel is e-marketing as of now. So Abhishek, emails, in fact, are a pretty good place to do A/B tests. For example, like there are some clients, I think you can research them, or if you don't find it, you can also ping me. There are clients which sort of let you A/B test the headline of the email, the copy or the body of the email, the images in the email, the CTA in the email, and all that. In email are a perfect place to sort of do A/B testing and then refine your email marketing strategy. I'm not sure whether somebody lets you test the email journeys or email triggers that you do, but definitely like there should be something there if you're looking at CRM program for an e-commerce player. Does that answer your question? If not, ask a follow-up or DM me on LinkedIn. Both should be fine. Rishabh, you have a question?
Hey, hi Deepak. First of all, thanks for the session. Really an insightful one. Just a quick thing, right? How do we run the experimentation on a product which is not end user facing, right? For instance, it's a platform which has the microservices and core services, and the core consumer are not directly the end user, but maybe the admins, and it's a B2B product. So
Yeah,
how do we dive
think
deeper into it? I mean, just to give you the background, sorry.
No. See, I would say on the extreme end of what you're talking about is something like a Stripe, which is actually B2B, but also B2C, where developers are the end users. And I think Stripe definitely does experimentation. In your case, depending on, again, like I said, definitely think about the size of customers you have, which is like, if you have just 50 customers, no point doing experimentation. But if you have a sizable chunk of customers, I would say the same rules that apply on B2C products or like these things also apply there. The only caveat being, you can use a limited rollout sort of thing to A/B test rather than actually A/B testing, because in limited rollout, if another client reaches to you and asks on why they are not seeing a particular feature and their friend at some other company is, you can always tell that it's a limited rollout. If you tell them you are actually testing this feature with them as
that's a bit.
Yeah, that's problematic, which is why, see, I think it's universally accepted practice for B2B products to say that they have a limited rollout. But what it essentially is doing is protecting any sort of downside and measuring any upside that the feature may have.
Yeah, because why I ask, in my case, the number of customers are definitely more than 5K. And at present, what we are doing the tech preview kind of a scenario, right? Where we would enable the feature or let's say a use case to certain set of customer and take their feedback before rolling out to the more general public, right? So I just trying to understand how can I use this way of experimentation in my scenario.
Does that answer your question or?
Yes, I mean, I need to figure out. I mean, there is no tools and techniques as of now. So let me figure out something, or maybe I'll DM you just in case I need more information.
Definitely.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Sure. Okay. I think we are at 10:30. If you have any more questions, feel free to ping me. You know where I reside on LinkedIn. But thanks again for attending the session and thanks for staying till the end. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.